Sit down, delegate. The chamber isn't yours. The command came not from volume, but gravity. Relendrax's tone sliced across the marble-tiered amphitheater without rising above conversational pitch. The tall delegate from Earth stood still at the chamber threshold, every line of his posture etched with control. Behind him, 8 black-robed envoys filed into the Galactic Senate, their boots echoing faintly against the obsidian tiles, each step measured, not slow, not fast. The silence behind them wasn't ceremonial yet. It was expectation, coiled like a storm about to be named. No one answered Drax directly. No one needed to. The Senate chamber had already begun to shift beneath the weight of what was coming. A long semicircle of alien seats overlooked the central speaking podium, draped today not in the normal house crest, but in Earth's morning black, a sheer fabric streaked with threads of compressed starlight, pulsing once every 10 seconds. They called it the Pulsavail, a kinetic memorial designed to echo the biosignal of the deceased. In this case, Ambassador Lorik Fran, dead, unarmed, in arbitration chambers just 2 weeks prior. The Senate's own eulogy had been diplomatic, if hollow. With deepest regret, the Galactic Senate acknowledges the passing of Earth's Ambassador Fran in the line of negotiation. No responsibility taken. No name named, no clause cited. Just a neutral expression, like a machine learning how to grieve. Relen stepped onto the speaking ring and stopped precisely at the interface node, where his boots activated the resonance sync. The ring responded. Soft white lights illuminated the arc, aligning with Earth's energy rhythms. Above them, the floating glass dome began to shimmer, displaying translucent star maps in slow motion. One system blinked out every 30 seconds, a symbolic tapering off of life in the ambassador's native region. Karen Velos stood beside him without acknowledgement. The director of Earth's Quantum Infrastructure Directorate wore no insignia, only a small black strip of carbon fiber across his right wrist, a token permitted in Senate protocol only during loss. Karen held a compact device cradled in his palm. It looked inert, unimportant, like a medical unit from a distant colony. But it wasn't. It contained the final key in a chain no one else realized existed. Not yet. Drax nodded once. The lights dimmed. Across the Senate, delegates from over 130 systems lowered their heads, or equivalent appendages. Some closed eyes, others altered posture. A silence fell so suddenly that even the air seemed to hesitate. A soft hum, not mechanical, but biological, began to thrum from Earth's delegates. Their breathing aligned, hands touched solar plexuses, microscopic biosignal projectors on their wrists activated, syncing their heartbeats into one. Above them, the resonance field bloomed. It was a shape more than a light, a latticework of translucent veins that mapped emotion into geometry. Morning had form, memory had mass. 3 minutes, that was Earth's morning rite. Not 1 second more, not one less. It wasn't spiritual. It wasn't sentimental. It was encoded into interspecies agreements under Section 7 of the Unified Ritual Charter, a clause Earth had introduced during early diplomacy, decades ago. That clause stated, a death during active negotiation requires planetary resonance synchronization, unless a cultural override is issued by the mourning species. No one ever objected. Until today, 37 seconds into the silence, something cracked, not sound, not light, but intent. A sharp scrape of chair legs pulled heads upright. A tall figure, scaled and layered in bone-etched plates, stood, Vraxt Mulgar of the Ziran hegemony. His mouth curled upward, not a smile, not a sneer, something hungrier. Dead air and delusion, he muttered, but the chamber's amplifier discs caught it instantly. The translation snapped into 83 systems in real time. Dead air and delusion. It was repeated, duplicated, rebroadcast. Several delegates flinched, others pretended not to hear. But the silence didn't return. It couldn't. Relen Drax didn't move, not at first. He blinked once, then lowered his arms to his side. Behind him, the other delegates from Earth slowly desynced their biosignals. The resonance field dimmed, the lattice dissolved. What was once unity now unraveled into individual pulses, separate, disconnected, each fading on its own arc. No word spoken, no demand issued, no protest raised. They simply turned and walked out. The sound of boots meeting stone echoed again, different this time, not mourning, not respect, not protest. Closure. One delegate, Navek Tral, a junior officer from the Vestan outposts, half rose from his seat and opened his mouth. But Relan passed him without a glance, and whatever Tral meant to say died in transit. The Earth delegation vanished behind the arching chamber doors. The Senate resumed session 12 minutes later, or it tried. Brasik Jorn, the Senate operations chair, ordered a resync of the ceremonial lighting matrix. It flickered, then reset, then flickered again. He tapped the ring console embedded into his podium. No response. Secondary input layers not responding, murmured one of the technicians. Vote-ready Syncframes are still buffering. Still buffering. Still buffering. Brasik echoed. Is this a hardware fault? The technician, a lean-eyed being named Jovran Tal, glanced up from his console, then back at the main interface. All Earth-built nodes are rejecting Senate ping authorization. Brasik turned to his adjutant. Which nodes? Tal looked again, his brows furrowed. Power relays, ComSync anchors, and quorum verification engines, 47% total. Brasik's mouth moved, but nothing came out. At that exact moment, across the outer ring of the Senate dome, the laser plasma displays above each delegation desk blinked once. Then in perfect unison, they flickered dark. The starlight eulogy above them collapsed like a dying constellation, and in the center of the empty ring, where Earth's delegation had stood, the interface node glowed red for exactly 3 seconds, then extinguished. Jovran's voice reached no one now. Are we truly expected to stand here, silent for a species that brought noise to every negotiation? Vrax Mulgar's voice cracked through the still-fading quiet like a blade dragged across stone. The resonance field had barely dissolved, the last strands of synchronized biosignals still flickering in the air like vanishing embers, when he rose from his seat, towering lacquer-scaled, bone-spined. The chamber paused, not because they were surprised, but because they weren't. Everyone knew Vrax's disdain. What shocked was the timing. He stepped forward. A shadow followed him, not literal, but reputational. The Ziran hegemony didn't mourn. They archived losses, classified outcomes, buried emotions beneath metrics. His gait suggested superiority baked into sinew, each motion engineered to command, not with elegance, but with inevitability. Above him, the Senate dome's laser plasma displays cycled from memorial overlays back to live session feeds. Their interface stuttered for a breath, long enough for Vrax's delegate signature to override default content authorization. A Ziran sigil, ignited in the corner of every linked stream, sharp as a broken shard and twice as deliberate. The override was not subtle, it wasn't meant to be. I'll say what others think, he continued, eyes narrowing into slits. This ritual is dramatized indulgence, dead air and delusion. Earth wraps superstition in protocol, and we let it infect policy. The words, delivered with surgical cadence, entered the Senate logs. Simultaneously, across 83 systems, the statement echoed through public relay stations, civic feeds, diplomatic centers, even entertainment archives. The override stream was tagged with Vrax's diplomatic clearance, giving it instant platform priority. Within 42 seconds, 3 billion viewers were exposed to the insult before any filters could trigger a moderation flag. The commentary began almost immediately. On Vordran's twin moons, media anchors blinked in disbelief as translators stumbled over how to contextualize the word delusion in diplomatic terms. On Calvarin Prime, a renowned philosopher paused mid-panel to ask whether this was sanctioned speech or personal collapse. No one had answers. In the Triarch broadcast spire, 2 cultural historians froze as the heads-up displays updated in real time. The moment replayed, audio isolated, Vrax's tone analyzed, micro-expression frames tagged for post-event socio-political dissection. One of the analysts whispered, "That's not commentary, that's a fracture." Within the chamber, the silence had warped. It wasn't ceremonial, it wasn't reverent, it had become observation, predatory, dissecting, charged with implication. Senate Chair Brasik Jorn straightened in his post. He didn't interrupt. He knew better. To engage would be to endorse. Across the aisle, 2 minor delegates from neutral systems exchanged glances, not out of sympathy, but calculation. The political balance just shifted, and every minor power was recalibrating their alignment. Mulgar rotated slowly, his gaze sweeping the empty seats where Earth's delegation had stood just moments earlier. They flee discomfort like they flee consequence, he said, slower now. Symbols do not bind galaxies, systems do. He let that hang. The room did not respond. Somewhere beneath the Senate platform, Jovrin Tall's console blinked red twice. Minor network desync. He frowned, but didn't speak. The glitch wasn't new. Senate tech hiccuped all the time. Still, he tapped in a diagnostics command. A warning returned. Node 14. Sync delay exceeds acceptable margin. Retest required. He ran the retest. The delay persisted. Override withdrawal, he muttered. Then glanced up at the dome. Vrax's sigil remained on screen. In system sectors far from the Senate chamber, political analysts began drafting early statements. Several minor worlds started preparing conditional alliances, just in case the Xeran hegemony's words hinted at deeper rifts. On Earth's diplomatic channel, nothing came. No rebuttal, no closure, just a cold signal dropout, and a single blinking word on every comlog associated with their delegation, unavailable. In the chamber, the insult was already transmuting into policy. Vrax returned to his seat, exhaling slowly, like a craftsman completing a sculpture. One of his aides leaned forward, whispered, "Too far, not far enough," he replied without turning. Across the galaxy, the broadcast seeded unrest. Some species scoffed, some nodded, others froze mid-sentence as they watched the transmission and noticed what didn't happen. Earth didn't reply, not even a gesture. In the absence of outrage, something else grew, speculation. Was it restraint, or was it permission? Laser plasma displays inside the Senate's administrative wing replayed the clip repeatedly, flagged for compliance review. No clause directly prohibited commentary on ceremonial silence, but Section 12.1 of the Equilibrium Access Charter did contain a phrase suddenly glowing red in the analytics software. Sovereign ritual interference, if deliberate and rebroadcast, constitutes violation of interdependency respect. The clause wasn't common knowledge. It wasn't referenced in diplomatic sessions, unless someone really wanted to draw blood without declaring war. Karn Velos had written that clause himself, 15 years prior. It was buried beneath 5 layers of negotiation annotations. Most believed it symbolic. It wasn't. Within the Earth-based Quantum Infrastructure Directorate, a sequence of verification pings arrived. Passive, silent. They confirmed 2 facts. The event had occurred, and it had been rebroadcast. Karn didn't speak. He didn't type. He placed his device into a black case, locked it, and walked to a biometric console set into the floor of his private office. He tapped his wrist against the pad. It scanned his pulse, his thermal signature, his neural rhythms. A message appeared across the heads-up display built into the case. Directive severance, legal grounds verified, awaiting chain confirmation. Karn stared at the screen, then without ceremony, keyed the next input. Back in the Senate, the debate resumed, or attempted to, but attention had fragmented. Delegates watched the exit door more than the speaker's podium. Vrax leaned back, eyes half closed. He had struck. He thought Earth had bled. He did not see what they had just unplugged. "Counselor, you should sit." The words weren't offered as advice. They arrived like a closing door. Quiet. Final. Relin Drax didn't raise his voice, nor shift from where he stood in the shadow of Earth's empty speaking ring. His eyes were fixed on the Senate's central tier, where a flicker of static still clung to the laser plasma display, the Xeran sigil pulsing faintly at the corner. Delegate Vrax Mulgar, lips curled, remained seated. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. Drax exhaled once, slow and steady, as if he were releasing a weight no longer worth carrying. Then he turned, not with haste, not with hesitation, and met the gaze of each Earth envoy aligned behind him. Karen Velas nodded, expression unreadable. The others stood in sync, their movements unmarred by urgency. It was the kind of exit that bore neither insult nor permission. Their boots pressed into the stone panels with the soft sound of release valves closing. Each step carried centuries of alliance, centuries of restraint, folded quietly behind unspoken consensus. The silence wasn't empty. It was executed. No one called after them. No one asked for clarification. In the upper galleries, a few aides straightened in their seats. A Drenian clerk dropped a stylus. It clattered once and rolled toward the tiered edge. The sound echoed longer than expected. Delegate Jorn leaned forward from his platform, brow furrowed, not confusion, not alarm, calculation. Jovrin Tal, still locked into his diagnostics console, looked up just in time to catch the tail end of Earth's procession vanishing through the obsidian gate. His hand paused mid-keystroke. "They didn't disable their ID strips," he muttered aloud. "What?" asked the aide beside him. "Their badges, no deactivation notice. They just left them live." Jovrin frowned and keyed into the central registry. Normally, a departing delegation would trigger a deauthorization cascade. Identification markers would fade from the central heads-up network. Earth's did not. Their signals dimmed, but they didn't vanish. "Isn't that a protocol breach?" the aide asked. "It's worse," Jovrin replied. "It's undefined." Up in the Senate's central rotunda, the vacuum of Earth's departure started settling into the bodies of the other delegates, not emotionally, but structurally. A dozen beings shifted uneasily. One rubbed the ridge above his breathing vents. Another adjusted his seating membrane, trying to recalibrate for what wasn't spoken. The chairs Earth left behind were still warm. Not literally. Their moregulators were standard, but warm in memory. Presence had weight, and Earth's was receding fast. Above, the laser plasma displays hesitated mid-shift. The system seemed unsure whether to overwrite the absence. The central feed stuttered, paused, and defaulted to a system-wide placeholder. A soft blue banner marked pending delegate input. A symbolic placeholder, a vacuum with a name. Drax had been the last to step through the arch. Before vanishing beyond the curved stone, he had turned his head. Once, not enough to be dramatic, just enough for the chamber to see that he had, indeed, looked back. The message wasn't in the glance, it was in its brevity. In Sector 4, where the diplomatic relay feeds were monitored for protocol compliance, Administrator Rassel Bryn watched the playback on loop. His station, surrounded by translucent interface panels, shimmered with a dozen time-encoded logs. He leaned in close to one, rewound the frame, slowed it further. They left mid-session. No official cause, no request for pause, no closure procedure, he said aloud. His assistant, a junior analyst from Helion Station, rubbed his temples. "So do we mark it as protest?" Rassel frowned. "No. A protest requires declaration. This wasn't declared. So, walkout? Walkout implies objection." He leaned back, arms crossed. They didn't object. They opted out. In the chamber, Vraxt Mulgar finally rose. His stride no longer carried the same edge. Victory had no applause. The air carried a new stillness, not heavy but surgical. A dozen delegates checked their notes, rechecked talking points, attempted to steer the session forward. Their words, though spoken, hung awkwardly in the chamber, as if awaiting permission to matter. In Senate logistics, Jovrin's console flickered again. He tapped into the delegation matrix. Earth's registry entry blinked yellow. Undeclared status. Session presence. Null. System sync. Active. He leaned forward. "That's not possible," he muttered. The assistant from earlier peered over. "What? They've left. Physically, but their system permissions are still active. Still broadcasting sync validation, just lower frequency." So, Jovrin tapped again, brought up the quorum baseline monitor. His brows furrowed. "So the system still thinks Earth is here." The aide blinked. "But they're not." "Exactly." The session proceeded. Vraxt spoke once more, directing a pointed policy suggestion toward Earth's vacant seats. No one answered. No one objected. The suggestion passed, technically, but the quorum lights misfired. Not enough to halt procedure, just enough to register delay. The speaker's podium paused, longer than expected. The floor lights beneath it dimmed momentarily, then restored themselves without direction. Jovrin noticed it all. "Too many stutters," he said. "Input lag isn't procedural anymore, it's reactive." The aide gave a half shrug. "Systems glitch all the time." Jovrin shook his head. "Not in layers, not like this." In the corridor leading to the Senate exits, a security officer glanced toward the sealed doors, through which Earth's delegates had departed. His display panel still showed their tags, active, blinking at reduced intervals. He tapped twice, tried to clear the registry. Nothing happened. The blinking continued. Outside the Senate, in the transit wing reserved for high-clearance personnel, Kyron Velos paused briefly beside an old diplomat's mural, an archaic engraving of joint hands crossing species boundaries. He didn't look at it. He simply placed his palm against a concealed reader, embedded in the wall beside it. The surface warmed. His biosignature confirmed. Directive timer initiated. Countdown 3H27M45S. He walked away without looking back. Inside the Senate, Vraxt resumed his seat. He drummed his clawed fingers once against the desk's corner, but no one was watching. They were all wondering what hadn't been said. Confirm node timestamp. Then wipe it. Can Velos gave the command without lifting his gaze from the embedded control surface. His voice held no texture, no anger. It didn't need to. He was not delivering punishment. He was initiating closure. Inside Earth's Quantum Infrastructure Directorate, a subterranean facility buried beneath the strata of the Varellan Ridge, 13 quantum stations blinked in quiet synchronicity. The room pulsed not with energy but with thresholds. Invisible walls were being crossed, one verification at a time. An assistant approached his station, gesturing toward a heads-up display shaped like a folding prism. Delegate Mulgar's statement has passed through all 83 confirmation channels. Replays crossed into the civilian tier 5 minutes ago. Can touched the display. A series of interlocking cubes folded apart, revealing the embedded seal of the Equilibrium Access Charter. He didn't speak. The system required no passwords, only breathprint, biotherm and sync path identity. His skin against the verification slate was enough. The charter glowed once, then bled red. Final clause authorization, the assistant asked, voice taut but contained. Can answered by tapping the severance line. Clause 27.4 Sovereign breach, via broadcasted ceremonial disruption, nullifies continued integration within Earth-managed infrastructural frameworks. A ring of encrypted parameters fanned outward from the seal. Behind it, a series of real-time systems lit up like glass veins catching fire. The assistant inhaled. This'll gut quorum verification. Can's eyes didn't move. They knew that when they drafted the treaty. Across the directorate, no alarms rang. There were no klaxons, no alerts, just a shift in rhythm. Trust pulses began to decay across the Senate's inner core. Not fail. Decay, like memory written over too many times. Earth's access nodes began their withdrawal. First to go, authorization keyframes embedded inside the voting ledger's heartbeat. Each decision made in the Senate was recorded via sync intervals, verified by a quantum trust lattice that time-stamped every pulse. Earth built that lattice, not just physically, but philosophically. It was encoded not only in code, but in consent. Now that consent was gone, keyframe 0 dropped. Someone called out. 5 more initiating time drift collapse. Another operator flicked a secondary console. Command signature denied from Senate Junction. Trust loop has ended. They're officially outside the pulse. A screen at the far end of the chamber reshaped itself into a cascade of diagnostic logs. Each line was a system architecture previously shared with the Senate: low latency relays, truth consensus validators, quorum security wrappers, all unraveling. Can keyed a secondary authorization. Begin the archive freeze. Across 3 nodes, data vaults flickered once, then sealed. Public Senate records from the last 67 cycles, which had been stored redundantly in Earth's archival sanctums, were locked. Not erased, not corrupted, unavailable. On the upper edge of the control chamber, a translucent ribbon unfurled along the wall. It displayed a countdown. It wasn't a warning, it was procedure. 3H02M14S, until full severance. Can Velos walked to the archive interface and tapped into the severance ledger. He entered one phrase. Not a threat, not a declaration. Directive executed. Authorization, Velos KT-97. Behind him, analysts continued rerouting Earth's own mirror systems away from shared lattice points. None of them commented. The air inside the room thickened, not with heat, but with permanence. Decisions like this reshape timelines. Another station lead spoke up. Trust decay is accelerating. The Senate verification cycle has begun looping requests. They'll think it's their comm filters, said another. They always do, someone murmured. Can moved back to his command terminal. His fingers hovered, then fell into motion. not fast, not hesitant. Each keystroke aligned with a procedural mandate crafted years ago, back when Earth still believed shared power could coexist with systemic dignity. Lines of text formed on the heads-up display above him. Syncframe detachment request initiated quorum certification. Suspended Senate relay anchors. Timed out structural harmonic status. Degrading a younger technician stepped back from his panel. Should we notify external partners? Can's expression didn't shift. They'll understand when quorum dissolves. The operator's throat bobbed. And when that happens, they'll remember who built the framework they ignored. The chamber dimmed slightly as Syncframe disassociation began to touch the infrastructure itself. Earth hadn't simply contributed tech, it had embedded relational logic into every layer, voting sequences, energy stabilization grids, consensus mapping tools. That logic only functioned when Earth recognized the system as valid. Recognition had ceased. Back inside the Senate, nothing yet collapsed. The lights still glowed, discussions still fluttered around the chamber, but the scaffolding had shifted. They were walking on structures no longer supported. Can checked the final line of the clause one last time. In the event of sovereign ritual breach and public rebroadcast, Earth retains the right to suspend infrastructural interconnectivity without warning or justification. Clause 27.4 is non-negotiable. His breath left in a whisper that no one in the room acknowledged. This was already decided. He closed the ledger. Outside, the stars continued to turn. The Senate continued to speak. Something's lying to the system. Jovran Tal didn't raise his voice as he spoke. He didn't need to. His console lit up like a flaring nerve cluster, each node flickering with inconsistencies that should have been impossible. He leaned closer to the primary quorum registry screen, eyes narrowing at a red thread creeping through a log file that had 10 seconds ago been flawless. A mild vibration passed through the floor under his station, subtle, like thermal compensation, not enough to sound an alarm, just enough to irritate awareness. He tapped his fingers once on the edge of the interface, scanning the data. On the left panel, time-stamped vote receipts began showing microsecond delays, delays too small for casual detection, but far beyond acceptable in quantum trust sync frames. He brought up the comparative matrix. Earth-based nodes were supposed to pulse every 6.4 seconds across Senate decision chains. They were pulsing at 7.3, and drifting. He opened a layered diagnostics window. Behind him, 2 junior technicians laughed quietly about something unrelated, some political quip playing across a corner screen. Jovran didn't respond. He pulled the room's ambient lighting down by 20% to isolate his work field and enlarged the vote verification engine logs. Why is node V06 cross-linking to itself? No answer. He asked the console again with direct input. The heads-up display returned a strange pattern. Redundancy loop initialized, target integrity, unknown. His mouth tensed. He brought in secondary metrics, internal harmonics of the sync lattice, cross-reference markers from the Equilibrium Access Charters Infrastructure Registry. Earth's nodes weren't just slowing, they were forking. He toggled to System Auditory Diagnostics, filtering the quorum trust pulses into sound map data. What had always played like a steady 3-note rhythm now lilted. One key had flattened, another skipped entirely. He exhaled slowly. Show me time drift logs from the last quarter cycle. The console hesitated. That had never happened before. The data arrived in a staggered column, flickers, reversals, timestamp contradictions. He keyed in a compression command to isolate anomalies. A pattern emerged, one that didn't look like a malfunction. It looked like a choice. Behind him, the conversation between the other techs shifted into murmurs. They noticed the shift in lighting. One of them stepped closer. You drop your filter settings again. Jovran didn't respond. He stared at the central screen as the Senate quorum map displayed flickering connections. Links supposed to form a single coordinated pulse vector across member systems now glitched out of alignment like strings on a frayed web. He turned finally, and gestured at the central data column. What do you see? The technician leaned in, confused. Missing ping packets. Why? Not missing, Jovran said, pointing to a highlighted log. Rejected. That's not possible. It is if they were disconnected upstream. From where? Jovran didn't answer. He turned back, entered a silent authorization, and activated the archival sync path report. The interface responded with a dull pulse, then spat back a one-line flag. Earth systems verification halted. Authority status. Revoked. He blinked once. The message remained. He leaned back. Every rational pathway in his mind fired at once. Council-level deniability, misconfigured trust IDs, maybe even corruption in local sync mirrors, but none aligned with the severity of what he was seeing. "They've revoked trust," he whispered. The junior tech frowned. "Who? Earth?" The room went quiet. He toggled the communications overlay. The heads-up display showed minor jitter across the transmission threads, microbursts of delay, unverified headers, echo feedback from interlinked quorum centers. He reached for the emergency protocol binder without thinking, not because it was time, but because he couldn't recall a scenario where it would be too early. One console suddenly flickered, light bending around its frame as the verification feed crashed and reloaded. The Earth registry vanished from the node map. "I just lost V-Sync recognition," someone behind him said, panic rising now. "It's a proxy outage," another offered. "Backup registry will come online," but the backup didn't initialize. The interface reset and simply displayed, "Primary verification host, undefined." Jovran swallowed. "They're not offline, they've rescinded alignment." One by one, Earth's sync frames dropped from quorum validation, like bridges dissolving in the middle of footfall. On the chamber's central pillar, where each member state's pulse rate metric should have formed a braided stream, Earth's strand fractured. It didn't collapse. It refracted into noise, striped red and gray, then fell out of visual spectrum altogether. Voting metrics began looping. Delay reports multiplied. A quorum call attempted to register a motion for resource recalibration, and failed. Not because there weren't enough votes, but because the lattice couldn't tell what a vote was anymore. The chamber's speakers issued a soft alert tone, followed by static, then silence. Jovran's fingers tightened around the binder. His throat felt dry, not parched, emptied. Behind him, the junior techs watched the wall-length display as quorum percentages dropped beneath 60%. Communications stuttered across internal channels. Peripheral servers blinked warnings in fractured language, half native, half data bleed. Someone whispered, "Is this sabotage?" Jovran shook his head. "Sabotage breaks things." He looked back at the screen, where trust pulses no longer blinked, and timestamps rewrote themselves into blank space. "This is withdrawal," and no one in the chamber had even noticed yet. "Reset the chamber core." Now Brosik Jorn's order rang out, but the system beneath him didn't acknowledge it. His console flashed amber, then deepened to crimson with no audible cue. There was no error tone, no warning siren, only light bending inwards where clarity should have been. Above the Senate's tiered floor, the great quorum dome, 6 concentric rings designed to pulse in equilibrium with every active vote, shivered, not visibly, not to the eye. But the air changed, slightly denser near the walls, and those who'd attended 1,000 sessions before this one knew something ancient had just broken. The ripple started beneath the ambassador platforms, lattice panels, designed to conduct stabilizing feedback from the voting harmonics, began to flicker, once then again, before settling into a slow, erratic blink. The pattern didn't follow protocol. It pulsed in irregular rhythm, like a dying heartbeat, mimicking life from memory. Jorn's assistant leaned toward the floor scanner embedded in the platform rail. "Torsion values are rising. Chamber resonance is out of sync with the core structure." "That's impossible," Jorn snapped. "No, sir, it's measurable." The figures on the display didn't lie. The baseline vibration, what engineers once called the chamber's heartbeat, was fracturing. It wasn't a failure in the usual sense. It was interference. Something had withdrawn its frequency, and the remaining framework was overcompensating in response. Delegate chairs began vibrating subtly, unnoticed by most until personal display lights began to dim. Delegates blinked and reached to adjust settings. Nothing responded. The laser plasma overlays across the chamber ceiling shifted again. Color halos, meant to track procedural order, began layering atop one another without logic. Pale green mixed with null red, forming distortion patterns that stuttered as if unsure which protocol to follow. A visual syntax error, built not by mistake, but by subtraction. Jovran Tall, 3 levels below in the infrastructure monitoring ring, pushed through his colleagues toward the environmental feedback column. His gloves pressed against the touch-responsive glass as he initiated a harmonic probe. The column didn't respond. Instead, the probe command repeated itself backward, mirrored, as if the infrastructure had lost directional fidelity. I need floor stress visuals, he called out. A sensor lead rerouted the chamber map, but the heads-up display fractured on load. Data fragments layered atop obsolete wireframe models. Some showed support columns intact, others replaced with shadow architecture, an older version of the Senate's inner structure. It wasn't a glitch, it was fallback. What layer is this? Someone asked behind him. Jovran didn't answer. The models weren't failing, they were reverting. Earth-built verification harmonics had governed Senate infrastructure for 43 years. With those permissions withdrawn, the systems weren't breaking, they were defaulting to base templates, protocols written before modern interdependency. Up above, a faint ringing, barely audible, echoed along the inner chamber. Delegates turned in unison, unsure if they'd imagined it. They hadn't. The echo wasn't natural. It was generated, a byproduct of harmonic divergence, where resonance fields once united in frequency now produced micro-conflicts, like two musical notes just sharp enough to fight each other, bleeding disharmony into the structure. A spider crack formed along the chamber's north arch, not structural, not yet. Cosmetic, a fault line in the decor, a hairline imperfection running across polished obsidian. Still, someone gasped. Jorn stepped forward, gripping the railing before him. What's failing? Structure's not failing, his aide said, scanning the floor metrics. The logic is, quorum lights typically white when inactive, dimmed to charcoal, then blinked into amber one by one in a spiral. No order, no vote, just systemic drift. The spiral spread outward across the chamber tiers. Energy redistribution channels, once invisible, began appearing in the form of faint cyan lines flickering along the floor seams. Normally, those signals were buried within the lattice. Now exposed, they bled light like veins in a dying body. Then the central chamber ring, where Earth's delegation had once stood, pulsed red, not blinking, not flashing, steady, unmoving, absent. Karn Velas's severance directive had already moved beyond infrastructure. Now it was rewriting presence. Delegate Malgar, still seated, tapped his console with growing irritation. His input failed to register. A second attempt returned a static overlay. He turned to his aide. Get me secondary uplink. The aide didn't move. He was staring at the ceiling. Malgar followed his gaze. The upper dome, usually seamless, was showing ripple interference. Thin fractures of light split across its inner lining, tracing outlines of the Syncframe web that once held the chamber's decisions in unity. Without Earth's trust pulses anchoring the frame, the overlay was collapsing inward on itself, not explosively, elegantly, as if folding. Tull, back at his post, checked atmospheric pressure indicators. They were fluctuating now, not dangerously, but erratically enough to produce inaudible frequency shifts. The walls breathed differently. The air itself trembled with imbalance. Someone finally whispered what no one else would. We're inside a quorum chamber without a quorum anchor, and the room designed to respond to consensus was failing to recognize consensus as real. Across the chamber, the final layer of dome lights went dark. One by one, each segment ceased functioning, not with sparks or smoke, but by dimming in smooth succession, like eyes closing in a spiral. No alarms, no protest, just silence chasing absence, and the Senate, still pretending it was whole, had no language left to name what had begun. Override authority. Chairman Code, Jorn Delta 07. Brasik Jorn's voice sharpened through the static haze clouding his control ring, each syllable weighed down by quiet dread. The chamber lights continued their descent into blackout, row by row as if the building itself were shedding delegates like old skin. The input panel under his palm offered no resistance, because it no longer offered anything. His fingers hovered, then pressed again. Nothing changed. The quorum dome, once the crown jewel of interstellar governance, now sat dimmed above his head like a dead star sealed inside glass. On the central platform, Earth's vacated segment glowed a dull crimson, a single silent indicator refusing to fade. The chair remained cold and empty, its presence now more symbolic than the treaty flags draped behind it. The platform's energy field no longer responded to input. It had become a sealed archive, untouchable. Behind Jorn, his aide, Visk Tell, typed furiously into the central command matrix. Error logs streamed across his heads-up panel, each line cascading over the last access denied. Node sync failed. Trust anchor missing. Tell cleared his throat. We've lost Earth's legislative identifier. Their entire access profile has been scrubbed from the frame. Every attempt to reference their registry returns null. Jorn's jaw tensed. What about their archive pathways, rerouted before the collapse? Data mirrors are intact, but the gateways are read protected by origin permissions. He stared at the chair again. So Earth's presence is gone. Tell adjusted his display. No sir, it's worse. Jorn turned. Define worse. They're not gone, they're blocked. Tell rotated the panel, showing a single error code blinking at the bottom of the registry. Status, entity, no longer recognized. The chairman's throat tightened, not from fear, but recognition. This wasn't sabotage. It was a declaration written in systems logic, not words. Earth hadn't withdrawn their delegates. They had withdrawn the Senate's right to see them. Below the dais on the infrastructure floor, technicians moved in silence. No one shouted. No one called for backup. They read the cascading system reports with the blank detachment of mourners watching sand fall through glass, each grain irreversible. Structural support nodes were still stable. The walls hadn't cracked. The floor hadn't shifted. But the Senate no longer functioned, not because it was broken, but because the architecture no longer trusted itself. Verification nodes spun without direction. Quorum signals echoed without confirmation. It wasn't a blackout. It was a self-erasure. Chairman, a dry voice buzzed through the chamber relay. System command has issued a provisional alert. Jorn tapped his wristband. Patch it to main. The overhead display surged, then blinked once before displaying a single cold line communique, stripped of formality, void of insignias. To Senate Core, Orbital Council seat from Interdependent Systems Management Relay, subject functionality status. This body is declared non-functional. Syncframe degradation exceeds 62%. Trust loops have collapsed. No node quorum remains verified. Legal architecture, unanchored. Sovereign sync discontinued. Directive fulfillment imminent. All administrative functions suspended. End of protocol. Output. No explanation. No request for acknowledgement. Just closure. Issued like an obituary. The laser plasma displays shut off simultaneously, not in failure, but by command. No more debate. No motion logs. No arguments for restoration. The Senate chamber had gone dark, not as a reaction to damage, but because the system no longer accepted its own authority. Tell rubbed his neck, staring into the dead glow above. They wrote this into the treaty from the start, didn't they? Jorn didn't answer. His gaze fell on the senatorial display ring, each segment used to pulse faintly with species color signatures. Now, only one still blinked. Earth, its ring, locked in red, slowly dimmed, until it too faded. But it didn't extinguish. It froze, time-coded into stillness. Vraxed Mulgar approached the platform, hesitant for the first time. He looked up at the main console. What does that mean? He asked. Jorn finally spoke, voice hollow. It means we're not in session. For how long? Jorn glanced at the inert command strip embedded in his desk. The usual cycle indicator no longer rotated. There is no session, not anymore. Mulgar opened his mouth again, but no words came. He turned and walked away, slower than he had arrived. Down in the infrastructure chamber, Jovrin Tall watched the system logs flicker to final status. Each protocol returned to flatline. Each data stream concluded in static. No colors, no sounds, just negation. Jovrin leaned back in his chair, eyes stinging, though he hadn't realized he'd been blinking so little. He reached for his logbook and wrote the last entry. Senate functionality revoked, due to unrecoverable trust detachment. No breach, no fault, no fallback. He stopped, then underlined one phrase 3 times. No breach. Above them all, in a chamber that had once ruled systems, silence claimed legal authority, not with war, not through fire, but by being unreachable. Is this a test, or a warning? The anchor's question echoed across 12 systems before anyone realized no one had the answer. She sat stiffly beneath the flickering blue glow of the Triarch global feed display, her face pale under the reactive broadcast lights. Behind her, a satellite image of the Galactic Senate rotated slowly, once proud, now dimmed, now archived. No officials had spoken. Not one confirmation from Core Command. No transcript, no clarification, just a blank record stamped with a single status, non-operational. Androskan Prime, A team of urban infrastructure analysts huddled around a failing traffic nexus, their eyes darting between readouts. Grid balancing subroutines, built on Senate-certified consensus code, had begun returning invalidations. Power supply indicators jittered. Timekeeping arrays slipped by nanosecond intervals. Public terminals blinked out of sync with planetary standard. One engineer stepped away, shaking his head. We mirrored everything through Earth's harmonics. A colleague looked up. You mean adapted? No, the first replied. I mean everything. On Kelvar Station, the largest trade port in Sector Theta, port authorities scrambled to recalculate orbital paths for inbound shipments. The regulatory framework used to assign landing vectors had lost quorum alignment after the central validator node began looping commands. Vessels paused mid-drift, unable to receive permission to dock. Captain Yorin of the SLC Strader slammed a gloved fist against his console. Why isn't anyone responding? The control deck replied with static. In the background, a junior officer read off a failing registry log. Earth-based relay authority not recognized. Node, null. Across Core Relay Channel 3, media commentators struggled to maintain tone. Broadcast scripts were replaced mid-session. Outdated statistics scrolled beneath panic-laced audio streams. One analyst whispered live on air, "They didn't attack, they just removed themselves." The phrase trended within minutes, not as sarcasm, as fear. On the moons of Oskivar, civilian data clouds began hemorrhaging latency reports. Agricultural drones failed to receive updates. Atmospheric regulators reverted to pre-standard behaviors, drawing in erroneous moisture cycles and compromising food yields. The Agricultural Council released a single line of explanation: dependent synchronization pathways, unresponsive. Earth signature unresolved. They didn't say breach, they didn't say sabotage, they said unresolved, which for the first time in galactic political memory meant something far worse than confrontation. It meant ambiguity without recourse. On Derek Shah, a university professor named Lorvik Hahn canceled his lecture mid-sentence after his lecture hall's sync-calibrated lighting fell into rhythmic desync. Students sat in darkness as projectors dimmed, revealing a single message etched in hard code onto the central university feed: temporal quorum unverified. He spoke the words aloud, as if saying them would make them unreal. It didn't. Everywhere the feed reached, commentary began folding into mythology. Conspiracy threads bloomed in every direction. Some claimed Earth had developed a failsafe long ago and activated it under the guise of grief. Others swore Earth hadn't left. They had just turned sideways in time. The only constant was silence from Earth itself. No rebuttals, no corrections. On Varelian Broadcast Channel 6, a panelist tried to soften the tone, adjusting his collar while reciting a pre-cleared statement. "Let us be clear," he began. "This is not war, it's regulatory error." His mic cut mid-sentence. Viewers across 4 systems watched as his signal was overridden by nothing. The screen simply blanked, then looped, then died. At the edge of planetary relay fields, technicians began recording environmental fluctuations in Earth-built hubs. These weren't explosions. There were no sparks, no breaches, but one by one, signal towers built with Earth's trust-layered logic began flickering with false confirmations, internal self-contradictions that made continued function impossible. At first, planetary engineers tried rerouting inputs. Then they realized the protocols required Earth's recognition to function at all. Without Earth's presence, nothing inside the treaty-bound systems could validate. Commands existed, infrastructure existed, but the meaning was gone. A mining colony, on Hesker 7, issued a planetary emergency when atmospheric regulators shifted into test mode and refused manual override. The AI cited treaty-based fail-safe triggers and then shut itself down. The colony administrator, Soren Vex, stared at the blinking console and whispered, "We built our worlds into their spine and never asked who owned the vertebrae." Back on Core-linked Media Hub 1, a newly formed panel debated contacting Earth for clarification. A senator from Yaros 9 leaned forward. "You're missing the point," he said. Another host blinked. "What point? They already gave us their message." "Where?" He tapped the screen. "In their exit." Around the galaxy, planetary governments began issuing silence advisories. They weren't coordinated. They weren't enforced. But each advisory echoed a similar pattern. Do not engage Earth. Do not transmit signals. Let them reach out, if they choose. One advisory in particular stood out, issued from the Lokari Confederacy. It read, "We recommend ritual observance, 3 minutes, no transmissions, in honor, in warning, in acknowledgement." The suggestion wasn't law, but millions followed. Sensors were dimmed, transmissions ceased, planets paused, 3 minutes long. No speeches, no analysis, just quiet, not mourning, recognition. Across those systems, Earth's absence now spoke louder than any fleet ever had. They didn't just leave, they removed the concept of being seen. The words belonged to Vec Talor, archivist of the Neutral Systems Assembly. He spoke them 10 years after the collapse of the Galactic Senate. No cameras recorded the statement. It was entered into the treaty revision hearings as a side annotation, and yet, it's the line most often quoted when silence is discussed. No successor council ever formed. There were attempts, fragmented, temporary, uncoordinated. Minor coalitions convened on distant stations, but quorum systems failed without Earth's trust-based frameworks. Some tried to rebuild from legacy tech. Others drafted new codes, lines of authority, designed without dependency. Each initiative faltered, not because of opposition, because none dared to include Earth, and none dared to proceed without them. The seats once reserved for Earth's delegation remained vacant wherever chambers tried to mimic the old structure. When replacements were suggested, proposals stalled. Systems began referring to Earth's absence not as a diplomatic gap, but as a stabilizing force that must not be interfered with. Empty chairs were built into chamber floors across 27 planetary governments, sculpted from obsidian and sealed in permanent access denial. They were positioned facing inward, never outward. Delegates were instructed never to address them. No insignias were allowed nearby. No names inscribed. No light ever cast directly. The seats became symbols, not of grief, but of consequence. On the moon city of Erithal, a mural was commissioned in their central records hall. It didn't feature Earth's diplomats. It showed a void shaped like a human silhouette, surrounded by systems crumbling into geometric disarray. The inscription beneath it read, "Respect or vanish." That line, once spoken in jest during off-record interspecies debates, now found itself enshrined in the revised Interstellar Accord, not as law, but as Clause 0, preceding even the opening paragraph. Earth had not demanded this. They had not replied to it. The line existed because everyone understood. Silence had become structure. Children on Savari were taught moments of stillness before classes began, not for prayer, for remembrance. 3 minutes synchronized to a global timekeeper, once tuned to Earth's resonance fields. No songs, no images, just still air, ticking slower than the mind wanted. On Valtari, the cultural ministry outlawed public jokes about Earth's departure. Satirists who mocked the collapse were not censored by force, but by societal recoil. No laughter followed those performances. No invitations returned. Galactic historians debated whether Earth's withdrawal was premeditated. Every analyst eventually arrived at the same conclusion. It didn't matter. Intent was irrelevant. The outcome had already reshaped law, language, and diplomacy. Cairn Velis's severance command remained sealed in the internal logs of Earth's Quantum Infrastructure Directorate. It was never referenced again. No statement was ever issued to confirm it had been intentional. But everyone knew, because since the day Earth walked out of that Senate chamber, no one had heard from them. Their relay hubs continued to operate, passively. No signals were blocked, no satellites repositioned, but every inbound message returned the same phrase: "This node is not accepting contact at this time." Not blocked, not accepting. The distinction was unmistakable. On Tyrus III, a renowned ethicist remarked during a symposium, "What we feared most wasn't Earth's firepower, it was their ability to remove meaning from our systems with a decision too quiet to challenge." Others called it infrastructure warfare. Some called it architectural sovereignty. The younger generation didn't use those terms. They simply referred to it as the quieting, a phenomenon, a shift in expectation, a precedent carved not into treaties, but into daily operations. In the years that followed, silent rituals spread beyond the diplomatic sphere. Before launching new planetary networks, developers initiated a grounding pause, a 2-minute window with no input, acknowledging the foundational protocols once shaped by Earth. No one enforced it, no one questioned it. Earth became myth not by vanishing, but by refusing to engage. The most feared power wasn't in their fleets, or in weapons they never used. It was in their absence, and the fact that nothing worked correctly after they left. And so their departure became the measure by which all future decisions were weighed, not in approval, but in fear of the alternative. The phrase was quietly added to every new interstellar agreement, embedded at the footer of every page, beneath the signatories, with acknowledgement of Earth's silence. To say more would be to speculate, to interpret it would be to miss the point. They disrupted no systems, they tore down no walls, they dismantled no bodies, they simply stood, watched, turned, and left, and everything after that collapsed politely, not with screams, with documentation. And so the galaxy lived not in fear of Earth's retaliation, but in the structure they left behind. A structure so complete, their absence still governs the living.